Welcome to the Jay and Rob Toy Show. It's another fun-filled, action-packed, accessory-loaded episode, but you get more than just me in this delightful package. You get my good friend, the Omega to my Supreme, Mr. Jay Bartlett. Jay, welcome.
Thank you, my friend. It is a pleasure to be back talking toys with you.
And we're gonna dive right in on this one. These are some tips, some rules, some guidelines about collecting that we're gonna explore this week, because when it comes to toys, collecting goes hand in hand with playtime, but you can't just start amassing. You've gotta have some guidelines and some sort of perspective when diving into this. Now, you're a master collector, a seasoned expert. You've been near and far, you've gone to and fro and back again. What are some tips that you have when it comes to collecting, or rules? Because I believe in rules. So what are some of your collecting rules?
Am I the guy to talk to about rules? I don't seem to have a lot as far as what I collect. I collect everything, and that's a problem. Okay, I'll throw one at you. The rule of two. It's one we've talked about forever. Of course, it's a Star Wars reference, but we use it when we talk about buying one figure to keep in the package and one figure to have playtime with, or to open and do photography or whatever other fun stuff you want to do. That is the rule of two. That is a must for figures that are just too cool. The artwork on the card is really awesome, so you want to preserve that, but the figure is just, you have to take him out as well because he's awesome. That is the rule of two.
So I love the rule of two for those marquee characters that just really speak to you regardless of the line. If you can find one in the package, or if you have one loose, it gives you permission to seek out a carded one, whether it's vintage or new. But let's take a step back. How do we collect to begin with? Are we focusing? Are we setting spending limits? Are we trying to get one of everything loose or complete or on card to begin with? Where do you start?
First and foremost, you start with your finances, absolutely. You have to set a budget. You have to do that. Otherwise, this hobby, like most hobbies, can get out of control real fast, and that's dangerous. So I always set a budget, a weekly budget of what I'm gonna spend. I also have a list of what I'm looking for, and if that doesn't fall into that particular budget, then the budget carries over to the next week. So finances is number one.
Now, will finance always be the thing that you fall back on? What if you find a figure or a lot that has the figure, or you go to a store and it's there, but it's outside of your finances? How does your rule combat with real-world scenarios?
It's funny you should mention that, my friend, because the rules go right out the window then, don't they? You've seen that a number of different times throughout our friendship and our career together. Now, if it's something that I'm looking for, like this second, like the Mego Buck Rogers ship, which you never see, especially in good condition, that's when the rules are meant to be broken, because that's a case where, hey, this might be a once-in-a-lifetime thing, so maybe we'll bend the rules a little bit.
And this is where I'm gonna jump in and trump your first rule of finance and say, finance doesn't matter. Opportunity always matters, especially when you know what you're collecting. So focus is another one, and you mentioned you have a list, so knowing what you're trying to collect and what you're trying to hunt, whether it's G.I. Joe or Turtles or Mask or He-Man, you're gonna know what's hard to find. And it almost doesn't matter what that price is once you find it, because you have to judge the value on the opportunity you have to buy it.
Sure.
Even eBay, which is said to have everything, doesn't always have everything. So when you find it out in a store, in person, is it worth passing it up just because it's outside your weekly budget?
Well, I'm going to quote our good friend Brom on this one, and he says, you know, as long as you're able to still pay your rent, pay your bills, put food on the table, that's more what I was referring to by keeping into a budget. But of course, you know, there's those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, like I was saying, so yeah, I've broken the rule more often than not.
Let's talk specifics. Let's talk collecting rules for specific lines. Collecting and Star Wars go hand in hand, of course, the collect 'em all phrase. Are there specific rules when it comes to collecting Star Wars that would be different from other lines? Like, what do you have to keep in mind when you're looking at Star Wars stuff that might not apply to TMNT or Thundercats or LJN wrestlers?
This is just from my experience from collecting Star Wars my entire life, in that Nowadays, it's been happening for a while, but there's a lot more reproduction weapons that you kind of have to worry about. Some collectors like to be pure and have the originals. Some don't care, they just want the weapon with their yak face or whatever, right? So I think these replicated weapons, especially for Kenner Star Wars, have become so good and so difficult to spot. You really gotta watch out for stuff like that. I would, of course, rather have the originals, of course, but I'm not gonna lose my mind if it's a replica and I don't know, because I'm not gonna sell it anyway. It's just from my collection.
Yeah, you gotta really be careful on who you're buying it from and make sure it's a trusted source if you're getting it from a store, or, you know, if you're doing it at a flea market or a garage sale, you've gotta have that knowledge and that insight. So make sure you know your stuff before you're making any purchases. But to that end, buying on card for vintage Star Wars is always a safe bet then.
Yes, and this is a road I've traveled down just a tiny bit. I think I have 1 or 2 vintage Star Wars on card. My friend, that's an expensive endeavor to get down, 100%. That going down that road is gonna cost you a pretty penny, so you gotta be prepared to spend some serious money if you want vintage carded Star Wars.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because while I don't collect vintage Star Wars characters, I am super fascinated with the packaging side of it because of all the different variants out there. So there's a lot of foreign variants and there's a lot of retail, like exclusive variants for different figures that came on card that didn't come on card for other places. So the collecting game for Star Wars vintage stuff is really appealing to me when I consider that stuff, because then I don't have to worry about repo weapons, you know, they're just the actual weapons that are in there. The reproduction side of it isn't a factor. And then I can really focus on just some key pieces because they're pretty expensive right now. But that's also a nice showpiece because look, here's this vintage, you know, Canadian 7-back. So it has French and English and it's, you know, exclusive to Sears in Canada. And it's like, wow, look at that. That's a really cool Star Wars vintage piece. So you don't go crazy over it.
Yeah.
You're spending some good money on a nice collectible piece, but you don't have any of the hassles that come with, you know, current day technology maybe messing up a loose figure sale.
And the number is in the hundreds. I think it's below 100 if I'm not mistaken. So it's not as daunting as G.I. Joe, which is, you know, far above that, 500s or something. So collecting every vintage Star Wars on card, it's gonna be super expensive, but there's not that many compared to other lines.
Well, you brought up G.I. Joe. Let's talk about collecting rules for G.I. Joe, because G.I. Joe, a real American hero, 82 to 94, there's a lot to consider when you start collecting that. What are some G.I. Joe rules or tips that you can think of that you've learned from your experience?
Focus. If you're collecting Real American Hero, that's a serious task. Ask yourself, what do you want to do? Do you want to get them all on card? Do you want to get them loose? And do they have to be complete? For me, myself, the Joes, I'm just trying to do the whole line loose. They don't have to be 100% complete. Now, some people, you know, are probably rolling their eyes at that, and I understand. For me, it's important to have a representation of each of the characters, and then I will find the accessories later. That's just how I work. Of course, if they're complete, I'm gonna go for that. But for me, it's very important just to have one of each.
Let's move forward and talk about collecting TMNT.
Oh.
Jay, this is a very sprawling line. I don't know if there's more than 500 figures rivaling a Real American Hero or not, but there is certainly a lot of figures, a lot of subsets, a lot of variations, a lot of different card backs.
Yeah.
What do you think some rules are for TMNT?
Oh, just be patient. I can't even imagine trying to collect all the Ninja Turtles. There are so many. I mean, you would talk about different versions of Luke Skywalker. That's nothing compared to how many there is of like Donatello. There's probably, I can't even guess. You would know more than me. I would say again, go into collecting turtles and have a goal set. You know, you want the original wave, you want the original 3 years. Do you want the 87 to the 90? Do you want the 90 and up? I think setting a goal for turtles is absolutely necessary.
I think the thing you've got to be careful at with turtles is where your budget gets spent, because it's easy to drop, you know, a little bit of money on a lot of different figures so you feel like you're collecting a lot, but there's a lot of roadblocks because there are very pricey figures out there in the turtle world. Stuff like Hotspot or Scratch or, you know, the Shogun Warrior turtles, stuff that wasn't popular, came out later in the run. It's super expensive, so you've got to be careful where you're spending that money. I think it's a very fun line to collect because, like you said, the first 2 or 3 years have all those iconic characters. And even within that, if you're collecting card backs, there's the 10 backs, there's the 22 backs or 24 backs. You can do English, French stuff.
I mean, exactly, I agree with you. Have a goal in mind. Does a variant, you know, soft head versus hard head, does that matter to you, or do you just want the original Raphael, you know? So you gotta ask yourself that.
Let's talk about some other 80s lines, Jay, stuff that I know you're super familiar with and that you collect, and I'm afraid to go down that route. Let's talk Thundercats, let's talk Cops or Visionaries, LJN wrestlers.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff, which is, you know, somewhat tier A, but definitely a tier B, like a supporting line outside the big four plus Star Wars. What kind of rules do you have for those lines?
Now, I wouldn't put the LJN WWF wrestlers in this category, but as far as Visionaries and Humanoids, all that kind of stuff, they're very obscure, they're very small lines. Again, it's not difficult in the way that there's a lot of characters to collect, but something like Humanoids are notoriously difficult to get all the parts. They have cannon arms that come off and helmets that are mostly always gone. So you gotta ask yourself, you know, do I just want the representation of Liquidator, or do I want him complete? Now, for something that small, I would only buy it if it was complete.
Yeah, a lot of those lines that didn't have the mass market that Masters of the Universe had or G.I. Joe had, if you can find it complete on card, snap it up, especially Thundercat stuff. It's a huge series. Tons of cartoons, lots of iterations, reboots, but finding those 80s figures on card and in good condition is very difficult. So keep your eyes peeled, and I guess one of the rules is you have to know your stuff.
One of the easiest ways to learn about a series is simply just by watching the source material. Watch the cartoon, watch the films, go to fellow collectors who are into Thundercats or into Inhumanoids, something, you know, a little bit more obscure, and just hang out and talk about that stuff.
I think the reason that Transformers are loved is because the kind of underlying story is this: the idea of the pursuit of perfection, the idea of the ability not to be limited by your beginnings or by what's known about you at any particular age, but the opportunity to change, to transform, to meet the challenges of the new day and become better and stronger by doing that. That is what's appealing. Transformers don't end. Transformation is continuous. So it is a celebration of life's ability to move us forward through time, improving what's around us and improving ourselves. And that's appealing. Who wants to live forever? Everyone. Because the human story is what propels it. That's where the fascination and the commitment of an audience comes from. They recognize the humanity of the characters. They recognize the nobility of the Autobots. They recognize the venality and the corruption of the Decepticons. We're watching a morality play unfold at all times, only it's exciting. And it's not in the usual costuming. I think there's a magical transference of possibility from the wishes of the child to the inanimate object, the toy. It is the repository of the imagination. It's proof that the imagination is triumphant because the powers ascribed to this toy, the powers that make it delightful, the powers that make someone want to look at it and admire it or have it, that's a transcendental phenomenon. It says, I value this because this is a repository of my imagination and my playful self, which sees possibility endlessly. If you can find something that equals that and it's yours, that's precious. And that's what those toys are. That's what old comic books are. That's what signatures of people you care about are all about. They are the physical manifestation of thought, of emotion. There aren't many of those. The diamond ring, that's one. The bouquet of roses, that's another one. But toys, every toy, well, any toy becomes, in a sense, a family member or a kind of emotion jogging device, because each toy owner sort of presents to it the equivalent of a Vulcan mind meld, only this is a Vulcan emotion meld, where the emotions of childhood, the excitement of the discovery, the pleasure in continuing to have it and have it close, or the recognition of who you were when it first appealed to you, is very strong. And so these toys carry childhood, carry learning, carry the future, carry how old was I when I decided I liked. They are, what can you call them? They are
Touchstones.
yeah, they're markers. They are genetic markers in the imagination.
Now, when it comes to collecting, Jay, we've talking about opportunity and we've talked about value, like the cost of these figures and setting a budget. But the other factor in that is, of course, the condition in which that you find stuff. How much of a factor is condition when you are collecting? Do you have a rule when it comes to condition, or is it just, grab it no matter what?
I don't really have a set rule for condition, to be honest. If it's a figure I've been looking for a very long time, I'm more likely willing to grab whatever version that is, with accessories or without. A loose version, doesn't matter, just to have that. Knowing that I have that finally and I can upgrade. That's normally what I do. Of course, I would like to get it all complete in one shot, because trying to get the weapons later is almost more expensive. But my point is, usually the first time I see it, unless it's totally destroyed and the paint's off and it's just mangled, I will usually buy it.
Yeah, I am very much of the mindset that I want it on card in the best possible condition, or it has to be loose complete. It has to have all the accessories and it has to be in really great shape, because I don't want to chase stuff around, because chances are if I'm pulling the trigger on something, it's taken a while for me to find it in the first place. So this is where I value opportunity more than just, the price. Now that said, when we're talking about condition, you have to talk about loose versus something on card. And loose meaning not part of the card back and it's outside the bubble, it's been played with, it probably has some wear and tear. What are your rules on, collecting on card versus collecting loose? Is it preference or is it a rule?
It's situational, to be honest. I recently just acquired Brainiac from the Superpowers line. And when I purchased him off a private seller, the card back is in pretty rough shape. The pictures, it made it look like it was in rough shape. And I'm like, for sure, this Brainiac is mint. I'm going to take him out of the card and then I can, shoot him and all that kind of stuff. And when it arrived, the card back wasn't that bad. Do you think I could open this thing? Absolutely not. So if we're talking vintage and it's on the card, it's going to stay on the card, plain and simple.
Well, it's time for Action Figure Spotlight, and we're talking collecting this week, and we've given a lot of rules, so I thought I would showcase a character that enforced one of the rules, and that is Battle Armor He-Man from the NECA Staction line. Now, these were designed by Four Horsemen, of course, and it's kind of an extension or continuation of the 2002 Masters of the Universe figures. There's no articulation. But the story behind this is, I'd only seen it once in store, on card, and it was like $150. Wow. These figures did not come to Canada en masse at all. I saw them in a collector shop in Toronto once, and I picked up like 4 or 5 right then and there. They were reasonably priced, like 25, 30 bucks. And then they disappeared because it was such a short, lived line. They disappeared and they were gone. And then I saw Battle Armor He-Man 15 years later, $150. I didn't pick it up. I thought, I'll see it later. Guess what? I didn't see it until I connected with a collector online on Facebook, and I said, hey, are you selling that? And he said, yeah, I was actually just trying to find a new home for it. And he said, it was 150 bucks. I said, yep, but it was off the card, but I hadn't seen it in 4 years, and I'd only seen it that other time, so my rule about opportunity has to come into play. Now, since then, I have acquired another one, so the rule of 2, and that other one is on card. So now I've got one in the package and one to display. Now this isn't his axe, but this is what I got with it, so that's why he's got it.
Now, is there any particular reason the Horsemen didn't put any articulation with these figures, being that they're the continuation from the 2002 series?
Not that I know of. I think it was more of like a tooling cost. How can we like put out the characters that people want that they never got but save money? And so clearly by removing joints and not having to do any kind of mechanization, it's gonna save money, especially because that 2002 line all had play features built into them. So removing that, this allowed us to have the figure. And because we're adult collectors buying the 2002 line, and these, they're just going on the shelf anyway, so it serves its purpose. What do you got to showcase this week that enforces one of your rules of collecting?
Well, I'm going to reference the rule of 2 that we were talking about. This is a figure that I've only ever seen once. He was on card, and I picked him up during the shooting of Action Figure Adventure Season 1. This is the San Diego Comic-Con 2008 exclusive Cobra Commander, or the Podium Cobra Commander, as he's known in the Joe community. This was such an amazing part in the comic book. This figure is from the comic. This is where he was rallying all the people together, kind of scheming them and kind of slowly turning them into terrorists without them knowing. He's just getting all his troops to rally behind him. And Cobra Commander in the comic book is very much just a man. He was a used car salesman. He wasn't a snake. He wasn't an alien or any of that one-off story stuff. He was just a man who, you know, the world didn't treat him so nice, and he had enough and he wanted revenge. This figure encompasses all of that. The card back is absolutely beautiful. It's actually better than the figure, in my opinion. So, being the rule of 2, that's why this isn't open. I would love to display this on my shelf back there. But until I find another one, he remains on the card.
Well, that'll do it for another episode of the Jay and Rob Toy Show. Jay, we're talking collecting, lots of rules, lots of tips. I gotta know, what is the one rule that you have that you constantly break over and over again?
It was the first rule that I talked about, and that was budget. It seems really easy to stick to a plan, and I can give advice to people and fellow collectors on sticking with the budget plan, but I must admit that is the rule that is constantly broken for me.